Nothing haunts quite like the realization that Hollywood's most dazzling icons, the faces that once captivated the world, often lived lives of profound loneliness and inner torment. They were molded into flawless images, but behind the dazzling lights lay a fissure, silent, perilous, and beyond repair by fame. We loved the characters they became. But we forgot they were just people with fears, secrets, and vulnerabilities crushed under the weight of pressure and prestige. They didn't die for a lack of talent, but for a lack of space to simply be themselves. As is customary for this channel, I've pieced together the fragments of information and speculation into a seamless narrative for you to absorb. Then tell me what you think. Sometimes, a shared understanding is all it takes to remember these souls for the humans they truly were. Now, let's open the file on the first name in Hollywood's tragic ledger, Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift, the name once whispered as a symbol of fragile beauty, complex inner turmoil, and a haunting sorrow. He was the original damaged heartthrob of Hollywood. A walking paradox of vulnerability and raw talent. His life? A drawn-out tragedy, unfolding from the dizzying heights of fame to a bitter end. Shaped by the crushing weight of celebrity and a horrific accident that sealed his fate forever. From aristocratic boy to the first damaged heartthrob. Born in 1920, Montgomery Clift grew up in a family with a peculiar aristocratic bent, educated 19th century style with extended European jaunts. This pedigree etched a distinct aura onto him, a classic beauty. Yes, but steeped in an unsettling mystery, like an unfinished Greek statue, yet utterly captivating. Monty, as those closest called him, wasn't your usual explosion of star power. Quite the opposite. He was the quiet in a noisy world, carrying those heavy, mournful eyes and a rare, almost painful sensitivity. He fell into acting young, barely 13, and quickly proved a born talent. Hollywood, ever the vulture, wasted no time circling this rare gem. With his striking looks, slender build, and uncanny ability to plunge into a character's depths, Monty was swiftly hailed as a James Dean before James Dean, laying the groundwork for the damaged heartthrob archetype many would later mimic. His roles? From the haunted George Eastman in A Place in the Sun, 1951, a part dripping with the loneliness of ambition, to the lovesick, ill-fated soldier Robert E. Lee Pruitt in From Here to Eternity, 1953, all wore a shade of melancholy. It was as if he wasn't acting at all, but simply reliving the hidden corners of his own soul for the camera. Clift's method acting, alongside Brando and Dean, redefined Hollywood performance, injecting it with an unprecedented authenticity and psychological depth. He shunned the industry's glittering pretense, chasing truth in every role. That made him an icon, sure, but it also lit the fuse of his own undoing. The fateful period. The 1956 accident. The zenith of his career, and the grim prelude to his downfall, arrived in 1956. After a party at the home of his closest confidant, Elizabeth Taylor, Monty drove head-on into a telephone pole. The horrific crash pulverized his sculpted face, a broken nose, a shattered jaw, teeth gone. Hours of surgery followed, not to save a life, but to reassemble a broken icon. From that cursed moment, Montgomery Clift was never truly Montgomery Clift again. Physically, his face was a grotesque mask, no longer camera-ready. His voice, slurred and heavy from constant painkillers, became a ghost of its former self. And those eyes, once holding oceans of sorrow, now held only emptiness. But the real devastation was the psychological shockwave. The accident flung Monty into a bottomless pit of addiction. He drowned himself in alcohol, tranquilizers, sleeping pills, and morphine, anything to quiet the screams of body and mind. Hollywood, a town with no mercy for ugliness or weakness, quickly turned its back. Producers became wary. His subsequent roles were often self-inflicted torture, no longer art, but a grim penance. Elizabeth Taylor, who saw it all, once remarked, "He just never really came back from that crash." The truth is, Monty was already dead before the car hit the pole. The accident was merely the official Hollywood stamp on a soul that refused to conform. A heart too sensitive for such a brutal world. The tragic end of a solitary soul. Montgomery Clift's final years were a descent into shadow. His apartment was a frequent stop for the cops, midnight screams, shadows coming and going, mornings with unlocked doors and scattered pills. He'd stopped caring about the public, about fame. All he needed was a glass of whiskey and a handful of pills to erase his name from the celluloid that had made him a legend. His last roles, while still boasting flashes of brilliance, were mostly the desperate struggles of a man bent on self-destruction. On July 23, 1966, Montgomery Clift was found dead in his apartment at 45. No note, no one by his side. His passing was so quiet that the man who found him only asked, "Is he gone?" As if Clift had never truly been there at all, just a specter haunting Hollywood for a few decades. The coroner's report listed natural causes, a heart attack. But for those who knew him, who understood the dark currents of his life, Montgomery Clift didn't die naturally. He died because this world wouldn't allow him weakness, couldn't tolerate a soul too artistic, too vulnerable, in the relentless grind of celebrity. He vanished, leaving a vast void in the hearts of his admirers and a legacy as the eternal damaged heartthrob, a symbol of beauty, talent, and a tragedy beyond repair. William Holden. The idol crumbles in silence. Some deaths hit like an explosion, a shockwave, reverberating through the headlines, leaving behind hot shrapnel of truth and scandal. But then there are deaths that are more like a stumble in the dark, no sound, no witnesses, and perhaps most terrifying of all, no one remembers until it's too late, too cold. That's how Hollywood swallows the souls it once worshipped, then spits out the husks when they're no longer useful. William Holden. The actor with those haunting blue eyes and that devil-may-care grin was one of those silent casualties. The golden legend on the silver screen. William Holden wasn't a name you easily forgot. Throughout the 50s and 60s, he was the mold, the living embodiment of the ideal American man. Strong, rakish, with a hint of defiance, yet always alluring, almost mesmerizing. He was the picture of cool composure and undeniable masculinity, a man every gentleman aspired to be, and every woman secretly yearned to be with. From the eerie glow of Sunset Boulevard, 1950, where he played Joe Gillis, a young screenwriter trapped in the decaying spiral of faded glory, to his raw grit and courage in The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957, as the hard-bitten POW shepherd. Holden didn't just act. He made you believe that Hollywood's shadows, for all their glitz and brutality, were the safest refuge for world-weary, solitary men. He was a bona fide A-lister. A name that guaranteed box office returns, a face hunted by top directors like Billy Wilder and David Lean. He had an Academy Award for Best Actor for his role in Stalag 17, 1953. A gritty war film where he brought fierce resilience and sharp intelligence to a prisoner suspected of being a traitor. Holden wasn't just handsome, he had depth. His eyes could convey the weariness of the world, a flicker of self-doubt, or a desperate shard of hope. He had a particular knack for portraying wounded characters. Men carrying their own private tragedies, hidden beneath a weathered exterior. Hollywood built William Holden, and the world adored him. But that was just the story on the screen. A glittering illusion this industry has always been so skilled at crafting. The slow rot behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, when the Klieg lights dimmed and the makeup was scrubbed away. William Holden was a man rotting from the inside out, an ancient tree hollowed by termites down to its roots. Hard liquor and cigarettes weren't just two lovers. They were two jailers who never abandoned him. They bound him, day by day, hour by hour, squeezing him in an inescapable loop of self-destruction. Whispers in the industry claimed he never arrived on set entirely sober. That the smell of alcohol had become a part of him, not the scent of a carefree partygoer, but a signature perfume. A heavy mask worn to cope with memories, with reality, with nameless fears. He drank to quiet the demons within, the voices of insecurity and profound loneliness. This was a man who crafted a perfect facade for the public, but who was quietly burning his own soul to ashes in the silence. William Holden's love life was steeped in similar tragedy. He once loved Audrey Hepburn, a beautiful, pure, almost haunting romance, a stark contrast to his own dark existence. They met on the set of Sabrina, 1954. She was a freshly bloomed flower. Pristine and ethereal. He was a man who had already tasted life's bitterest pills. Their love was a symphony unfinished, a dream that never came true. He couldn't keep her, he didn't dare marry her. He couldn't stop drinking for her. He'd even had a vasectomy without telling her, fearing she wanted children. Was it the ultimate act of selfishness, or the ultimate fear of fatherhood? Of a responsibility he knew he couldn't bear in his deteriorating physical and mental state? Audrey drifted away, light as a cloud across the sky. And he remained, burdened by regret and a never-ending ache of loss. From then on, every one of Holden's performances carried the scent of failure, not in his acting, but in how he desperately tried to convince the world, and perhaps himself, that he was fine, that everything was under control. But it wasn't. Not by a long shot. The twilight years and the dissolution of solitude. As the twilight years descended, Hollywood's glow began to fade for William Holden. He lived alone in his Santa Monica apartment. A place that once symbolized lavish living, now a gilded cage. Friends drifted away, partly because he isolated himself, partly because they grew tired of his self-destructive habits. The phone rang less and less. The name once etched onto an Oscar statuette now existed only in old newspaper clippings, faded film reels, and the dim memories of a bygone generation. He kept drinking, no longer to forget anything, but because there was nothing left to remember, nothing left to look forward to. Alcohol had become his sole companion. The veil covering an empty life. His career grew erratic, with successful films interspersed with lesser projects. While he still delivered acclaimed performances, like in Network, 1976, where he played a television executive weary of the industry and social masks, a chilling reflection of his own life. That role earned him another Oscar nomination. But it couldn't salvage the real man who was steadily slipping away. He grew gaunt, his eyes sunken, always seeming to carry an unnamed sorrow. He was once an icon of masculine beauty. Now he was a mere shadow of himself, worn down by time and by his own grim choices. Death and silence, a case closed. On a November night in 1981, the final tragedy struck. William Holden fell in the bathroom of his private apartment. Perhaps it was the alcohol, perhaps old age, or simply an overwhelming weariness. The horrific impact sent his head crashing against the bedside table, creating a massive wound. Blood flowed. A lot. Too much. But he didn't call for help. No one heard a sound, no one heard a cry. No one came. There was no one. Solitude had muffled every sound, every last hope. His body was discovered days later, in a state of mild decomposition. A celebrated actor. A man who once drove women wild and directors into bidding wars, was now dead in a silence so terrifying. No sign of struggle, no indication of a fight. As if he had accepted his fate with a grim resignation. No one knew exactly how long he had lain there before he was found. No last words, no letter, no sign of regret or hope. Just a cold, stark end. Hollywood, as usual, reported it briefly, coldly. William Holden, 63 years old, died in an accident. An accident? Or a deliberate surrender? A final capitulation to the demons that had haunted him his entire life? No one bothered to dig deeper. The flow of entertainment news was too fast, too crowded. Those who once admired him were now busy with new names, different magazine covers, younger scandals. Hollywood had grown accustomed to draining the souls of its stars, then discarding them like stage refuse when they were no longer valuable, leaving them in the deepest solitude. When the memorial was held, only a handful of people showed up. Close friends, former colleagues, but not many. Audrey Hepburn, his former love, didn't come. Perhaps she couldn't bear to see him like that, ravaged and alone. Perhaps she had learned to preserve the beautiful memory of a dashing, talented William Holden, rather than shatter it with a brutal reality. Whatever the reason, her absence felt like a perfect conclusion to Holden's story, romantic, sorrowful, and forever incomplete. An incomplete love, an incomplete life, an incomplete death. William Holden didn't die from a simple fall. He died because Hollywood no longer needed him. He died because of a system that squeezed dry the men who were once legends, draining their talent, their souls, their youth, then cast them aside like trash after the show, abandoning them to ultimate loneliness. He dedicated his entire life to the screen, to the roles the public adored. But he never found peace for himself. He once said, when asked about his career, a chillingly stark statement. "I never wanted to be a star. I just wanted to be left alone." And in the end, he got his wish, in the coldest way possible, in the eternal silence of a cold bathroom, with no one to witness, no sound to break the stillness. William Holden's death is a brutal reminder of the price of the spotlight, and of the souls shattered in Hollywood's unforgiving grinder. George Reeves. Superman and the death no one dared touch. The night of June 16, 1959, Los Angeles knew no rain. No thunder. Just a single gunshot. And a body sprawled on a bed, blood blooming across white sheets, eyes wide, as if still grappling with what had just happened. George Reeves, the man who first brought the image of Superman to millions of American children via the small screen, was dead. The police called it suicide. The file slammed shut with unnatural speed. But if it was truly that simple, then why do hundreds of unanswered questions still fester in the shadows? Questions no one dared utter above a whisper? The man behind the cape, an icon trapped. George Reeves wasn't born to be an icon. He started his career in the trenches, playing bit parts, a blink-and-you-miss-it appearance for Alfred Hitchcock in Gone with the Wind, then slugging through dozens of B-movies. It wasn't until he donned the form-fitting blue and red suit of Superman in the 1950s TV series, Adventures of Superman, that he became a household name, etched into the hearts of American families. Kids adored him. But Hollywood? Hollywood had other plans. When the series wrapped, Reeves became a victim of the very symbol he had forged. No director wanted to hire a real-life Superman. Too famous. Too typecast. Too hard to sell in other roles. Reeves found himself unemployed amidst widespread adoration, a bitter, cruel irony. He sought solace in the bottom of a glass, drifting through the gilded cages of high society parties. And there, he fell into the orbit of Toni Mannix, the wife of Eddie Mannix, a powerful, shadowy studio executive at MGM. They called Eddie Hollywood's fixer, the man who swept the dirtiest scandals under the rug, the kind of ugliness the press was never allowed to touch. The affair between Reeves and Toni stretched for years, intense, unhealthy, and dangerous. When Reeves finally tried to break it off, Mannix wasn't pleased. Tony, meanwhile, spiraled into panic. And Hollywood began to whisper. A dangerous game, indeed. The night it all went dark, a crime scene or a cover-up? The night he died, there were 3 other souls in the house. His new fiancée, Leonore Lemon, a friend, and a mysterious guest. Their story was simple, neat, almost too tidy. They heard Reeves walk upstairs, the bedroom door slamming shut. A single shot. Done. Finesse. But no one heard him scream. No one saw him bring a gun upstairs. There was no sound of an argument, despite Leonore later complaining about Reeves wanting to break off their engagement. The police, those bastions of law and order, failed to check for fingerprints on the gun. No tests were run for drugs or alcohol in his blood. And stranger still, 2 other spent casings were found in the room, but no one ever bothered to explain them. It all reeked of a rushed job, a script written too quickly, with too many plot holes. The fatal shot was to the right temple. Reeves was left-handed. No signs of struggle. No suicide note. Just a body, a gun, and too many missing pieces. It was almost as if someone wanted the case closed before it even truly opened. Leonore, the sole woman present, quietly slipped out of Hollywood weeks later, vanishing into the night. Tony Mannix, his former lover, suddenly disappeared from public view. And Eddie Mannix? He declined every interview. Not a single word of condolence. He didn't even show up at the funeral. A silence so chilling. It screamed volumes. For decades, the conspiracy theories have swirled around the case like vultures. That Reeves was murdered to keep him quiet. That he was about to expose a chain of scandals within the old studio system. That someone had cleaned up the scene so quickly the gun was still warm. A private investigator, hired years later, once remarked, every piece of evidence points to this not being a suicide. But no one wants to reopen the case. Because there are names behind it, names the average man isn't allowed to touch. Hollywood remains silent. Just as it always does with inconvenient deaths. George Reeves, the man who was a hero in the eyes of children across the nation, died in a drama where he wasn't allowed to write the final act. They hastily stamped suicide on his file to preserve the pristine image of Superman. But in truth, the only thing they needed to save was the reputation of a few powerful figures. Men larger than any symbol. He once soared across the silver screen. But in real life, he fell, silently, alone, and forgotten in the shadows of things no one dared speak aloud. Do these 3 parts resonate with the detective noir drama tone you envisioned? Would you like me to continue with other Hollywood figures? Or perhaps explore a different angle on one of these tragic stories? Salmano. A death without an enemy. Hollywood has faces that are forever framed in the audience's memory, not for their longevity, but for their youth, for the promise they carried and the heartbreak they left behind. Salmano was one of them. At just 16, this Italian kid from the Bronx was handpicked by James Dean to play Plato in Rebel Without a Cause, 1955. That role, a sensitive, lonely, almost overtly queer teenager, grabbed the world by the throat. Mineo became the voice of a lost generation, a raw nerve exposed for all to see. And that was the first curse cast upon his young life. The rise and the curse of a label. With 2 Academy Award nominations before he was even 20, everyone in the business believed Mineo was destined to be the next big thing. A pillar of Hollywood's future. But James Dean's shadow stretched long and deep, a haunting presence that no one could escape, least of all Sal. And the image of Dean's queer kid clung to Mineo like a shroud, a suffocating label in an era where a mere whisper about one's sexual orientation could kill a career faster than any drug scandal. The studios, ever protective of their carefully constructed illusions, kept a tight lid on anything that didn't fit the sanitized mold. Sal's talent was undeniable, but his truth was inconvenient. The industry, which once lauded his natural vulnerability, now saw it as a liability. They wanted leading men, not fragile boys. Minio's range, his ability to convey deep emotional turmoil, was dismissed as being too specific. He found himself trapped in the very box his early success had built. The roles grew smaller, less significant. The phone calls from Hollywood power brokers dwindled to nothing. The press, once quick to praise his youthful brilliance, now turned on him, labeling him an aging star with perpetually wet eyes, a cruel jab at the very sensitivity that had once made him unique. He was too authentic for a world built on artifice. Sal Mineo began his inevitable slide just as he hit his 30s. Leading roles evaporated. The lucrative offers dried up. He wasn't forgotten overnight, he was slowly, painfully, starved out. He tried to reinvent himself, to find a new corner in an industry that had no room for him. He turned to the stage, seeking refuge in the raw honesty of live performance. He directed a few off-Broadway plays, gritty and experimental, far from the polished mainstream. He taught acting, passing on the craft he still adored to a new generation. Perhaps seeing a reflection of his own youthful hope in their eager faces. He even tried his hand at singing in small nightclubs, the kind of dim, smoky joints where desperation mingled with dreams. He was scraping by, performing for audiences of mere dozens, a stark contrast to the millions who had once watched him soar as Superman's boy sidekick. But it was all just a delaying tactic. A futile attempt to postpone the inevitable, oblivion. Mineo, to his credit, never truly hid his homosexuality. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flamboyant. But he wasn't exactly secretive either. He lived his truth, as much as a man in Hollywood in the mid-20th century could. And it was that very honesty, that refusal to fully conform, that made him an easy target, both for the unforgiving industry and a deeply prejudiced society. He was an outsider, a rebel not by choice, but by the very nature of who he was. He once spoke in a 1975 interview, his voice carrying the weary resignation of a man who had fought too many battles. "I don't regret being who I am. But I pay for it every single day." It was a chilling prophecy. The final curtain, a knife in the dark. The night of February 12, 1976, Sal Mineo wrapped up a rehearsal for the play piece. Your Cat is Dead. He was hopeful about the role. A chance at a comeback, a crack in the wall of indifference that had surrounded him. On his way back to his West Hollywood apartment, he pulled into the dimly lit carport behind the building. A routine act that would be his last. A shadow emerged from the darkness. A blade glinted. One swift, brutal stab, piercing his heart. He crumpled, blood bubbling from his mouth. His hands still clutching his car keys. No one heard his cry. No one came in time. Just the muffled sounds of a city that was always too busy to notice a life ending in a dark alley. Mineo died at 37, no Oscar in hand, no starring role on the horizon, no salacious scandal to light up the tabloids. Just a man cast out of the spotlight, abandoned by Hollywood. And murdered by a complete stranger. The initial police investigation was a mess, rife with assumptions. They suspected a passion killing, even hinting at a homosexual motive. Eager to tie his death to the very identity he refused to hide. The press, ever the vultures, swooped in, the lurid death of a rebel icon, behind the velvet curtain, lust and blood. They painted a picture of a sordid end, a victim of his own lifestyle, conveniently ignoring the systemic issues that had brought him to this point. But the truth, as it often is, was far simpler. Far more heartbreaking. A year later, a man named Lionel Ray Williams, a career criminal with a history of robbery, was arrested for an unrelated crime. He confessed, out of the blue, to stabbing a man that night, admitting he thought he had money in his wallet. A random act of violence, a meaningless end to a life that deserved so much more. Salmano, one of the 20th century's most sensitive and authentic actors, died from a senseless knife wound. Not for love. Not for hate. Just for the random cruelty of a city always hungry for blood. There was no lavish funeral. No grand monument. Just a few lines in the papers. Salmano, Oscar-nominated actor, dies at 37. A footnote in the vast, unforgiving annals of Hollywood history. But he is still there, in Plato's bewildered gaze at James Dean under the planetarium dome. In every trembling breath of a soul never allowed to truly grow up. Hollywood killed Mineo not with a knife, but with its cold indifference, with its fear of authenticity. With its refusal to accept anything outside its narrow, glittering confines. And that city, even now, has never truly admitted its guilt. Bobby Driscoll. The Disney Prince and the Death with No Name. Some deaths bring tears. Others, a chilling silence. And then there are deaths like Bobby Driscoll's, or even the death certificate didn't know whose name to write. He was once Peter Pan. Once Disney's golden boy. He once made all of America pause before their TV screens, captivated by an innocent smile and those wide, expressive eyes. But Hollywood never truly loves children. It only loves what children bring: profit, bright lights, saccharine charm, and then it discards them when their light fades. The rise of a child star, a gilded cage. Robert Cletus Bobby Driscoll, born in 1937, was discovered at the tender age of 5. It happened in a barbershop in Pasadena, where he accompanied his father. One glance, and the barber, who happened to know a casting assistant, changed the boy's life forever. And Hollywood, in its cold, calculating way, did the same. The kid first popped up in Lost Angel, 1943. Then swiftly landed roles in a string of Walt Disney's most cherished films. In Song of the South, 1946, So Dear to My Heart, 1949, and especially Treasure Island, 1950. Bobby wasn't just an actor, he was an icon. The child everyone wanted to have, everyone wanted to befriend, everyone wanted to keep forever young in their memories. He was pure, unadulterated innocence, bottled and sold. In 1950, he became the first child actor to receive a Special Academy Award. Walt Disney himself hailed him as the studio's crown jewel. And by 1953, Driscoll officially became the voice and the visual model for Peter Pan, the boy who would never grow up. It was the perfect role, a cruel twist of fate. Because Peter Pan did grow up. And no one would accept it. The fall from grace, adulthood's cruel sting. Adolescence hit Bobby Driscoll like a freight train. Acne erupted, his voice cracked. From the bright-eyed, luminous boy, he morphed into a gangly, awkward teenager, no longer fitting any idealized mold. He was no longer the cute, marketable package. In 1953, Disney slashed his contract. No warning. No reason given. No goodbye. Just a clean cut, a disposable asset. From a national symbol, Bobby became a jobless kid. He tried to find roles on TV. The phone never rang. He attempted college, hoping for a normal life. He was bullied, an outcast, too famous for his own good. And then he found the familiar solace that every lost young soul in Hollywood eventually discovers: drugs. heroin, benzedrine, barbiturates. Nothing was too early for a discarded Peter Pan. At 17, Bobby was busted for the first time for marijuana possession. By 20, he had been in and out of jail more than 10 times for theft, drug possession, and assault. The descent was swift and brutal, a public unraveling of a once beloved image. Hollywood had built him up, then left him to rot. By the late 60s, Bobby Driscoll, nearing 30, was a ghost. Unhired, unremembered, unnamed. He drifted through the shadowy alleys of New York's East Village, sketching in an anonymous artists' community, sleeping in derelict buildings, under moss-covered stairwells, as if he had never had a past at all. He was a phantom, haunting the very city where dreams were born, yet his own had been shattered. The unmarked grave, a nameless end. And then, in March 1968, two boys playing in an abandoned tenement on 371 East 10th Street stumbled upon a body in a corner, decomposing, no identification, no papers. Just a nameless corpse, discarded like yesterday's trash. The police hauled the body to the city morgue. Cause of death, heart failure due to drug use. No one knew who he was. No one came looking for him. The body was unceremoniously buried in a pauper's grave, marked only by an anonymous code. 2 years later, his mother, desperate, contacted Disney to track down her missing son. New York police opened the cold case file, cross-referencing old fingerprints from a past arrest, and only then did they learn that the nameless corpse was none other than Bobby Driscoll, America's Peter Pan. No funeral. No farewell. Not a single news headline substantial enough to honor him. A Peter Pan who never got to fly back to Neverland, instead collapsing like a homeless ghost in the very city he once helped build with his dreams. Walt Disney, the man who once called him the greatest child actor the studio ever had, offered no eulogy, no public acknowledgement of the tragedy. The world still broadcasts Peter Pan every year, still sells toys in his likeness, still sings the songs of Neverland. But Bobby Driscoll? He had no place in the fairy tale anymore. Perhaps Peter Pan never wanted to grow up, because when you grow up in Hollywood, you die young. And no one remembers your name. Charles Rocket. The laughter that choked on screen. Hollywood always knows how to weaponize laughter. And sometimes, the first one shot down is the very person making the audience roar. His real name was Charles Clavery, but they called him Charles Rocket, a moniker that sounded like a promise of an explosive career. Tall, handsome, charming, Rocket was once tipped to be the successor to Bill Murray, Chevy Chase in the American comedy landscape. And he had a start that couldn't have been more brilliant, landing a spot in the main cast of Saturday Night Live, SNL, for the 1980 to 1981 season. He was ready for launch. But then, in a single night, everything went up in flames. And Rocket never returned to orbit. The detonation, a 4-letter word on live TV. The date was February 21, 1981. After a comedy sketch parodying the infamous "Who Shot J.R." storyline, the show wrapped up with its usual cast goodbyes. On live national television, the host asked Charles how he felt. He grinned, a knowing smirk, and deadpanned. "It's the first time I've ever been shot in my life. I'd like to know who the fuck did it." That word, fuck, raw and censored, echoed like a gunshot straight through his career. American television, at that time, had a zero-tolerance policy for obscenities. The SNL executives panicked. NBC faced a firestorm of criticism. And a few weeks later, Rocket was fired from the show, branded with the indelible image of a live-on-air saboteur. He had become a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered in green rooms. The phone stopped ringing. No more contracts were offered. He became the guy who swore on TV, a stain almost impossible to scrub clean, even as he stubbornly kept trying. The slow fade. Laughter's dying echo. Charles Rocket never gave up the craft entirely. He plunged into the murky waters of supporting roles, a cameo here, a bit part there. You'd see him pop up in Dumb and Dumber, Hocus Pocus, moonlighting, or in minor TV shows, doing voice work, toiling in the quiet corners of the industry. He was still in the game. But something vital inside him had died the moment that cursed fuck left his lips. The confidence was gone. The sparkling eyes of a chosen one dimmed. All that remained was a man standing in the wings, laughing to himself, telling jokes no one wanted to hear anymore. The spark had flickered, and no amount of bit parts could reignite it. He was a comedian without an audience, a performer without a stage, relegated to the background, a silent testament to a career derailed by a single, ill-timed word. The final, macabre joke. A death without laughter. October 7, 2005. The body of Charles Rocket was discovered in the backyard of his farmhouse in Canterbury, Connecticut. His throat was deeply slashed, blood pooling on the ground. No weapon in his hand. No one around. No suicide note. Just the chilling silence of the New England countryside. The autopsy report concluded. Suicide by self-inflicted razor wound to the throat. One of the rarest and most agonizing methods of death, especially for someone with no documented history of severe mental illness. It didn't add up. His family, perhaps in shock or seeking peace, accepted the conclusion. The media reported it dryly: actor Charles Rocket dies at 56. End of story. Case closed. But for those who still bothered to look closer, the death smelled off. Some friends stated that Rocket had shown no signs of depression. He was still working, still sending in new script drafts, still fighting to claw his way back. Days before his death, he'd attended his son's wedding, laughing, posing for photos. His wife was the one who found the body, but she refused all interviews, sealing her lips, adding another layer to the enigma. And then there was the most disturbing detail: no fingerprints were found on the razor blade. No explanation. No deeper investigation. No questions asked in a town all too accustomed to strange voluntary deaths. A comedian, dead because no one found his jokes funny anymore. Or perhaps, he told a joke that was too true. Hollywood doesn't like those who embarrass it. And Charles Rocket had done just that, with a single word, broadcast during national primetime. It was a scar on their carefully manicured facade. And they excised him without a second thought. No one can be sure what truly happened in that backyard that night. But everyone understood. He wasn't the first to be cast out of the industry for a slip of the tongue. And perhaps, he wouldn't be the last to pay with his very life for a moment of ill-spoken truth. Jonathan Brandis. The Angel Who Never Got to Grow Up. Chapter 8, Brad Renfro, A Verdict Without a Judge. Not every child star comes from Broadway. Not every prodigy has a manager mom or an actor dad greasing the path with connections and clout. Brad Renfro came to Hollywood with nothing but dust on his shoes, sweat on his skin, and a raw instinct that couldn't be taught. He was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, a place as far from Hollywood as you could imagine. His mother was a hairdresser. His father walked out. Brad grew up in a trailer, pedaling through cracked streets and picking schoolyard fights. No money. No dreams. Just a reckless grin and wild, haunted eyes that made it impossible to look away. At age 10, Director Joel Schumacher spotted him, just a scrappy kid, while casting for the film adaptation of The Client by John Grisham. No acting school, no endless auditions. One meeting was enough. Schumacher famously said, "This kid doesn't act. He lives inside the movie." And he did. Brad became Mark Sway, a poor boy who witnesses a suicide, hunted by the mafia. Pressured by the FBI, and he played it with grit, fire, and a pain far beyond his years. The film was a smash hit. Audiences couldn't believe he'd never acted before. Hollywood had found its new golden boy, the Renfro phenomenon. Then came the flood, Tom and Huck, opposite Jonathan Taylor Thomas, apt pupil, a twisted tale of a teen obsessed with a Nazi relic. Under Bryan Singer's direction, Sleepers, Bully. Each role carved from the same mold, damaged kids, too smart for their own good, burning from the inside out. Because that was Brad. On screen and off. Hollywood loves kids who bleed truth on camera. But it doesn't heal them. By 14, Brad was drinking. At 15, smoking weed. At 16, he was arrested for possession of cocaine and heroin. Convicted, but got probation. Then came another arrest, stealing a yacht. Another, driving without a license. Every court date came with headlines, former child star arrested again, next to sunken eyes and hollow cheeks that used to sell out box offices. He still acted. But only in low-budget indies no one saw, no one remembered. No studio would touch him. No insurance would cover him. He became Poison, a career pariah. The cruelest twist? Brad never lost his talent. Even in his final roles, buried in the indie underground, he could still set the screen on fire. But he couldn't outrun himself. And no one was left to pull him back from the edge. He once said, "Hollywood doesn't want to hear me anymore. It only remembers who I was. Nobody asks how much it hurts now." On January 15, 2008, Brad was found dead in his Los Angeles apartment. Cause, heroin overdose. He was 25. No girlfriend. No best friend. No one knows how much he took, or what kind of pain he was trying to kill. Hollywood didn't weep. The press gave him a few lines. His family held a quiet funeral back home in Tennessee. But the real betrayal came later, at the 2009 Oscars. When the Academy left his name out of the in memoriam montage. No farewell. No footage. Not even a still photo. As if he had never existed. Brad Renfro was a verdict with no courtroom. A kid discovered, used, praised, then tossed aside like a broken toy. He never got his comeback. Only the spiral, one that Hollywood helped engineer, then walked away from when the crash came. Like Jonathan Brandis, Brad didn't die from drugs. He died because no one wanted to save him. Brad Renfro. A verdict without a judge. In the murky glow of the 90s small screen, Jonathan Brandis was the poster boy for every adolescent fantasy, golden hair draped over intelligent eyes, a smile that could trigger a studio riot. And a gaze that hinted at something deeper. He wasn't just handsome. He had talent. And most crucial, he had time. But Hollywood? Hollywood wasn't so patient. Brandis started his grind at 6. A blur of commercials, sitcoms, TV movies. By 14, he was front and center in The Never-Ending Story 2. Then came The Pint-Sized Writer in 1990's It. The Stephen King adaptation that launched him sky-high like a flare. But that wasn't the peak. In 93, Jonathan inked a deal with NBC for Lucas Wolenzek in the sci-fi serial sequence DSV. A computer prodigy, handsome, sensitive, living beneath the waves with a state-of-the-art submarine crew. Lucas became a phenomenon. Jonathan became America's #1 teen idol. Thousands of fan letters hit his mailbox weekly. He was voted most desired face in every teen rag. Tiger Beat, Bop, Teen Beat, his name was plastered everywhere. But what nobody bothered to teach the kid was this: the brighter the spotlight, the deeper the shadows. When Sequest was unserrated after its third season, Jonathan's leading man days dried up. Offers trickled in for bit parts or B-grade features. Directors didn't know what to do with a handsome 20-year-old who used to be a child star. No foothold. No purpose. The DeepSeek genius began a real dive into his own mind. Jonathan tried. He tried writing scripts. He went for big-time auditions. There were flickers of hope. Like when he landed a role in 2002's Hearts War alongside Bruce Willis. But by the time the film hit theaters, his part was cut to oblivion. His name wasn't even whispered in the trailer. He went quiet. Friends whispered he started drinking more, talking in circles about failure, about no place for me in this business. He once told a pal, "They only wanted me when I was 16. Who am I now? A has-been." On November 11, 2003, Jonathan hanged himself in his Los Angeles apartment. His girlfriend found him, still breathing, but after a few days in a coma, he was gone. No note. No scandal. No clear motive. Just, he couldn't take it anymore. The press offered a shrug and a few lines. Colleagues stayed silent. No public memorial. No wax figures or tribute videos. Hollywood doesn't like to talk about failure. It despises discussing its own. Jonathan Brandis, once the face of a generation, died as quietly as if he'd never been. His old fans, now grown, learned the news from a cold, distant communique: former TV actor hangs himself. But if you look closely, you'll see, Jonathan's death wasn't suicide. It was a slow strangulation, a decade in the making. Every rejected contract. Every excised role. Every casting door slammed shut. Every person who'd once screamed his name. Then turned their back when the fame faded. A gradual chokehold by silence. Lingering too long after the fireworks fizzled, that was Jonathan's only transgression. He broke no laws. No addictions. No scandals. He just wasn't needed anymore. And in Hollywood, that's enough to kill a man. River Phoenix. The flame consumed under 1,000 eyes. If Leonardo DiCaprio was Hollywood's favored son, raised and nurtured, then River Phoenix was the fire Hollywood set and then watched burn. He wasn't your typical pretty boy. No pretense. No pigeonhole. River carried a soul the camera couldn't hide, a beautiful, unfeigned pain, irreplaceable. From the tender age of 14, he was Chris Chambers in Stand By Me, a street kid. Discarded by society, living with the sins of his parents. That role, seemingly too complex for a teenager, emerged perfect in every glance, every clenched jaw, every silent tear. You couldn't tell where the film ended and the real boy began. River Phoenix lived as if there were no protective membrane between him and the world. He didn't drink soda, didn't eat meat. Refused to smoke unless the script demanded it. Idealistic. Vegan. An environmentalist. He'd argue with directors on moral grounds. His eyes always held a heavy wisdom, far beyond his years. He once said, "I don't need to be famous. I need to live right." They called him the new James Dean. But they were wrong. James Dean was rebellion. River was wounded. By his early 20s, River was an Oscar nominee, Running on Empty, starring opposite Keanu Reeves in My Own Private Idaho, lauded by Gus Van Sant and Sidney Lumet as rare in his generation. Johnny Depp, DiCaprio, Ethan Hawke, Christian Slater, they all respected him, admired him. But the brighter the lights, the more savage the shadows. River started drinking to escape the psychological weight of his roles. Then came LSD, marijuana, and finally, heroin. He hit it well. On set, he was on time, his performances still explosive. But friends whispered. Sometimes he'd sit in the middle of a meal as if he were hearing something from outer space. Halloween night, 1993. River Phoenix arrived at the Viper Room, co-owned by Johnny Depp, for an impromptu performance with his brother Joaquin and Flea's Red Hot Chili Peppers band. He'd been drinking heavily. Some said he took liquid heroin, a potent killer. Others claimed he was drugged. 0:45 a.m. River bolted from the club, collapsing on the Sunset Boulevard sidewalk. Joaquin dialed 911, frantic. "My brother's having convulsions. His face is blue, he's not breathing." Hundreds stood nearby. Everyone recognized River Phoenix. Everyone had once claimed to love him. But no one knew how to save him. When River died, he was just 23. A legend who never reached his peak. A soul who hadn't yet found the language to protect himself. The news shocked the world. But what hurt more wasn't how he died. It was the gentle light that had once emanated from him, choked out by the cruel expectations of Hollywood and the public itself. After River was gone, his friends were never the same. Johnny Depp confessed. "I never stepped foot in the Viper Room again after that night." Keanu Reeves remained silent for years. Then poured himself into cold, solitary roles. Joaquin Phoenix, the younger brother who'd followed him onto every set, took years to find his footing, eventually moving forward. Turning his wounds into art. River Phoenix isn't forgotten. But he's misunderstood. He wasn't just an addict who died young. He was a soul too fragile for a world that had no time for fragility. An angel forced to carry the weight of roles far larger than himself. He didn't need an Oscar. He didn't need a blockbuster. He just needed to be himself. But Hollywood only loved him when he was a symbol. And it cast him aside when he began to need help. In the abandoned house of pop culture, there's a locked room named Phoenix where all the most beautiful lights suffocated from lack of air. Michael Clark Duncan. A giant with a child's heart. In a dirty town, if a giant appeared, one who could heal all wounds, what would you think? Strange? Terrifying? Or impossible? Michael Clark Duncan existed like that both in real life and on the silver screen. A black man, nearly 7 feet tall, muscles like mountains, a voice as deep as a drum from the earth's core. Yet with the eyes of a lost child in a crowded market. Born in the South Side, Chicago, where guns popped faster than school bells, Duncan worked every damn job: ditch digger, bouncer, bodyguard for rappers, moving TV equipment, before Hollywood finally noticed. No acting classes. No slick maneuvers. Duncan carried only one weapon: an authentic, unfeigned gentleness. Then, in 1999, destiny called his name. Frank Darabont, the man behind The Shawshank Redemption, was casting for John Coffey in The Green Mile, a giant with a miracle touch. Condemned to death for a crime he didn't commit. The role was near impossible. It needed someone who could terrify audiences with their size, then make them weep with a single look. Bruce Willis, who'd worked with Duncan on Armageddon, put in a good word. And Duncan, in his first major role, made the whole world hold its breath. John Coffey and Duncan saved millions of hearts, embodying the very definition of kindness, faith, and the tragic irony of good men left unprotected. He was nominated for an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Called the biggest heart I'd ever seen by Tom Hanks, and became a strange icon, Hollywood's biggest, gentlest giant. Unlike most black male stars of his era, Duncan didn't tumble into booze, parties, or scandal. He was a devout vegetarian, spoke like a gentle monk, gave to charity often, and never once griped about discrimination. When asked if he found Hollywood unfair, he just smiled. "If I live well enough, the roles will find me." And indeed, Duncan's career took off. He appeared in blockbusters, Planet of the Apes, The Scorpion King, Sin City, Daredevil, Talladega Nights. Not always the lead, but he always stood out, not for his sheer size, but for his quiet demeanor and eyes as true as morning dew. But there was one thing Duncan couldn't overcome: the relentless glitter of the world around him. Not because he craved it, but because he was too innocent to guard against it. In 2012, while in a relationship with reality TV star Omarosa Manigault, Duncan suffered a heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital and survived, but his health steadily declined. Less than 2 months later, he passed. 54 years old. No drugs. No scandal. No mystery. Just a heart too big, too tired, that simply stopped beating. There was regret. Tom Hanks penned a long letter. Bruce Willis went silent. Morgan Freeman uttered. Duncan never knew how great he was. But what haunted Hollywood wasn't the death. It was the question: why did a man like him, pure, gentle, without blemish, leave this world sooner than those who lived by the blade? Michael Clark Duncan didn't die because Hollywood discarded him. He was loved, respected. But in a world where speed is a religion, he didn't have time to rest. Amidst the applause, perhaps he himself forgot that his heart was weary. And like John Coffey, the character who made his name, Duncan left this world quietly, carrying the wounds others had left behind. He wasn't rebellious. He wasn't a failure. He was simply too good to last long in a place like Hollywood. Epilogue: those who couldn't find their way back. Some were born to touch the sky, but were never taught how to turn around. There are stage lights that never dim, but never truly offer warmth to the lonely hearts standing beneath them. From Heath Ledger with his mournful eyes behind a clown's mask, to River Phoenix collapsing on Sunset Boulevard, from Brad Renfro, desperate for someone to just ask, to Michael Clark Duncan, the man with an angel's smile and a giant's body, they all shared a common thread: they were loved for their purest essence, then abandoned when that purity couldn't withstand the onslaught. Hollywood didn't kill them, but it built the ladder with no foundation. It waited for them to climb, cheered them on, hailed them, crowned them prodigy, genius, the voice of a generation, the one to change cinema itself. And then when they fell, it turned away, as if no one had ever promised to catch them. Sometimes death doesn't come from heroin or a strange pill. It comes from an exhaustion that lingered too long, with no one bothering to ask, "Are you okay?" It comes when the child within them is locked behind the lights, with no room left to cry. They didn't need to be saved for their fame. They needed to be saved because they were human. If someone had only asked Jonathan Brandis, "Do you need to talk?" If someone had told Anton Yelchin, "It's okay to take a break." If someone had stopped Paul Walker and said, "Don't drive tonight. Your daughter is waiting." Perhaps. The true tragedy isn't death, but the world's quiet forgetting of silent pain. We weep when we hear they're gone, then switch to another movie the next day. We share posts about talented artists taken too soon, then quickly scroll down to see who's trending. We say we love them, but we don't listen to them. And so, the years will continue to swallow the names once etched on the Walk of Fame. But somewhere, late at night, in an old song, or in the eyes of a young actor, we can still catch a glimpse of their souls. A boy with a guitar on a sidewalk. A pair of bewildered eyes in a crowd. A trembling voice trying to hide its despair. They are still here. No longer on the red carpet. No longer acting. Only remaining in stories like these, where we tell of them not as stars, but as human beings who try to survive in a world too dazzlingly bright. If there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. Talent can make you remembered. But it's empathy, that's what makes you endure in the hearts of others. Remember them, not to mourn, but to learn to treat those still living with more gentleness. Because somewhere out there, there are still young artists, fragile souls, sitting alone backstage. Hoping someone sees them, not as performers, but as people. Some were born to touch the sky, but were never taught how to turn around. There are stage lights that never dim, but never truly offer warmth to the lonely hearts standing beneath them. From Heath Ledger with his mournful eyes behind a clown's mask, to River Phoenix collapsing on Sunset Boulevard, from Brad Renfro, desperate for someone to just ask. To Michael Clark Duncan, the man with an angel's smile and a giant's body, they all shared a common thread: they were loved for their purest essence. Then abandoned when that purity couldn't withstand the onslaught. Hollywood didn't kill them. But it built the ladder with no foundation. It waited for them to climb. Cheered them on. Hailed them. Crowned them prodigy, genius, the voice of a generation, the one to change cinema itself. And then when they fell, it turned away, as if no one had ever promised to catch them. Sometimes death doesn't come from heroin or a strange pill. It comes from an exhaustion that lingered too long, with no one bothering to ask, "Are you okay?" It comes when the child within them is locked behind the lights, with no room left to cry. They didn't need to be saved for their fame. They needed to be saved because they were human. If someone had only asked Jonathan Brandis, "Do you need to talk?" If someone had told Anton Yelchin, "It's okay to take a break." If someone had stopped Paul Walker and said, "Don't drive tonight. Your daughter is waiting." Perhaps. The true tragedy isn't death, but the world's quiet forgetting of silent pain. We weep when we hear they're gone, then switch to another movie the next day. We share posts about talented artists taken too soon, then quickly scroll down to see who's trending. We say we love them, but we don't listen to them. And so, the years will continue to swallow the names once etched on the Walk of Fame. But somewhere, late at night, in an old song, or in the eyes of a young actor, we can still catch a glimpse of their souls. A boy with a guitar on a sidewalk. A pair of bewildered eyes in a crowd. A trembling voice trying to hide its despair. They are still here. No longer on the red carpet. No longer acting. Only remaining in stories like these, where we tell of them not as stars, but as human beings who try to survive in a world too dazzlingly bright. If there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. Talent can make you remembered. But it's empathy, that's what makes you endure in the hearts of others. Remember them, not to mourn, but to learn to treat those still living with more gentleness. Because somewhere out there, there are still young artists, fragile souls, sitting alone backstage. Hoping someone sees them, not as performers, but as people.